guys, Josh here, back with a brand new video today. We're going to be discussing, is Formula 1 in a crisis and what is the solution to bring it out of this pretty dismal state it's in at the moment. We've got teams, struggling for cash. We've got dominance in the form of Mercedes. We've got dwindling viewing figures in everywhere else in the UK. And just a general show of F1 is certainly disappointing fans, and I can definitely see, fans dropping off, I think, as the year goes on. And sadly, it's not the best time for Formula 1 after such a good few years, I think, before the V6 era. And I guess many people did enjoy 2014 as well. But I'm going to be coming on to talk about that later on in the video. But let's start off then talking about the cars and what I would do to them to improve the show of Formula 1. Start off with the engines then. With the engines currently, of course, V6 engines, these very technical, very complex hybrid engines, and they really don't need to be, in my opinion. We should never have really moved to V6s. I didn't see the problem with V8s. I guess, the argument they're cheaper isn't true, because the V8s were about 5 million. These are about 27 million, which is just stupidly high in terms of cost for teams like Caterham and Marussia. It basically pushed them off the cliff of F1. Marussia managed to get back up. Caterham, sadly, of course, now defunct. And, it's not really a good prospect for future teams joining with these, massively complex, expensive engines. I don't know what they were trying to do with them. I guess, making them more environmentally friendly, but just really 20 cars going around a track for about, an hour and a half every 2 weeks really make much difference to the environment. Are they trying to, be closer to road technology? Because that's pointless, because who really cares how relatable the F1 cars are to road cars? That's the whole point. They want to be different. It's good escapism from our boring road cars. We can have these fast race cars. And of course, that's another thing. They're not very fast and not very loud. A lot of people are very, very annoyed that they're not very loud. In my opinion, it's not the worst thing. We can't just go back to V12s, V10s, so that's a ridiculous idea by many people. Many of these people just want to go back to 2000 to 2004, but in my opinion, that would be a mistake. It's a backward step for F1. F1 must reinvent itself. We can't just go back to what we've already had and try and replicate it. It'd be like trying to replicate 2012 again. You just can't do it. Good years in F1 happen, through luck and through, good setting up, I guess, of, rules and freedom through aerodynamics and equal engines. This is what I really, really would like to see in Formula 1. More equal power units, so we're not having the Mercedes cars just going out and winning every single race. We're not going to have a top 10 full of Mercedes-powered cars. We're going to be having Renault, Honda, Ferrari, Mercedes engines, all mixing it in the top 10 like we've seen for so many years before this 2014 to 2015 era. We really haven't seen engine dominance like this for a long, long time, and it is very, very worrying, because it could last as long as 2020. If I was the bosses at the top of F1, if I was in that strategy group, which I'll go on to later, then I'd definitely get rid of the V6 engines for 2017, bring in some new, V8 engines. I think that's a good mixture. We don't want to go too high, I think, with the V10s, V12s. They're a bit too expensive, but outdated in my opinion anyway. I think V8s are good for F1. Increase the aerodynamic effects and make the front wings a lot simpler, because they're not very good at the moment at all. They're basically, as I've labelled them many times on Twitter, anti-overtaking front wings, practically, just because they really don't encourage F1 with the really don't encourage overtaking in Formula 1. Because, they're just a ground effect on the cars, and they seem to have basically, created this ground effect just from this year, from last year to this year, which is very, very strange. It obviously is something to do with the, new front wings, and even those ugly front wings in 2014, they provided overtaking. These new 2015, more attractive front wings have certainly done practically the opposite. Would love to go back to the old front wings, really. I think of, well, many people like these kind of complex wings, maybe 2008. I'm not really the biggest fan of them. I think that they're kind of old, maybe because they were actually old, but I think they look a bit old-fashioned. They're not really, I think, what the pinnacle of motorsport should really look like. They should look more slick and modern, maybe a bit like what we've seen from some of the concepts, or maybe just what we have now, basically, but a bit more redefined. I mean, they look nice, the cars, I think, at the moment. That's not really the biggest problem, though, in F1, is it, at the moment? My two main gripes, well, actually, three main gripes. Number one, the engine, as I mentioned. Number two is the front wings and the kind of ground effect, these anti-overtaking front wings. I really like more aerodynamic freedom as well, to really encourage innovative designs from some of the smaller teams. We've seen the revolutionary S-ducts from Sauber in the past few years. Of course, we saw the F-duct from McLaren, you know, backmarkers. The backmarkers team, McLaren, of course, coming up with the F-duct back in 2010. This is revolutionary ideas, you know, from Braun and Red Bull we've seen in previous years with the double diffuser. You know, of course, double DRS, of course, you know, Lotus trialing a few years back. These kind of concepts would just be made a lot easier to come up with more, you know, relaxed aerodynamics with a budget cap, which I know is very idealistic. Probably will never happen because, hey, you know, the simple fact is we just can't agree on a budget cap, which is the strangest thing ever, you know, and very frustrating, certainly for a lot of the F1 teams. Third thing, and then I like to do with the cars, is the cars a lot harder to drive. They're just too easy to drive at the moment. In my opinion, a 17-year-old should not come in and be as fast as someone who's racing those cars for 7 years. They should have to learn them, should have to tame an F1 racing car. It shouldn't be easier than a GP2 car to drive. A lot of the GP2 racers come in, get a day in an F1 car and think, hey, that was easy, I'm going back to my much harder GP2 car. That is not right. You know, F1 is a pinnacle of motorsport and needs to maintain its status as that, because it's certainly under threat at the moment. Many people don't consider it to be anymore. It's not the fastest sport, sorry, not the fastest motorsport, and it's certainly, you know, not the fastest, you know, aerodynamically, you know, because there's just no freedom. A lot of the cars look the same, and they probably shouldn't, in my opinion. I like having varied looks on the cars. It's more distinctive. I know we don't want the Tusks or maybe the Caterham nose from last season, but I do really want distinct, revolutionary aerodynamic ideas, which can only be created through, you know, loosening the rules on the aerodynamics. Hence why Adrian Newey left to go and do sailing. But anyway, coming back to the, you know, the cars being harder to drive, that would be, you know, definitely, I think, a good move for F1. It would make it a lot more harder to drive. We'd really see the, you know, lap times, I think, really change between teammates as well, which I really want to see. You look at let's look at the driver standings now. It's just 2 Mercedes, 2 Ferrari, 2 Williams, and 2 Red Bull. It shouldn't be like that, in my opinion. Look back at any other year, and you probably have to go back, well, I don't know, probably never have we ever seen this in F1. It's absolutely ridiculous. We shouldn't be seeing this level of dominance just because of the power unit, and just because we're not seeing the gap between teammates, which we really should be, but just because the cars are just too easy to drive. We're not seeing as many mistakes as we, you know, used to before, because you have all these silly driver aids and all these things that the drivers have to, you know, on the steering wheels, and I don't really mind them managing fuel. I don't really mind them managing tyres, because it comes down to skill. Who can manage their tyres better? Who can just push the car at the right time? But if you can just push basically for a lot of time, or, you know, lift and coast, which, you know, I know that's not pushing, but I mean in the sense that they're not really on the edge. They're not really right on the edge of crashing or just spinning out, which I really do want, you know, the cars to be like that, to be so hard to drive, to think that we're going to be seeing, you know, mistakes a lot from rookie until they get it sorted out. If you're not good enough, you know, you're going to be out, but those who adapt quickly are going to be those who are going to be stars in the future. And that, at the moment, we're not seeing, because every driver who comes into F1 is instantly fast, is instantly consistent, is instantly not crashing out in recent years. And in my opinion, that is not right. We have to go back to having cars that are, you know, harder to drive. Take away the power steering, take away a lot of the driver aids that are, you know, not secretly implemented, but a lot of the driver aids we don't actually know are implemented are actually in there, and they definitely need to go. It's got to be harder to drive an F1 car, and it should be some of the hardest cars, you know, to drive in the world of motorsport. And, you know, I think certainly at the moment they're not achieving that. Like I mentioned, GP2 cars are probably harder to drive, and that is not right. That is not good Formula 1. You know, certainly it should be the pinnacle of motorsport, and probably at the moment it's not. So in this video then, I've talked about the cars. I think I'm going to be talking about the commercial side to do with Bernie Ecclestone, John Todd, why I think Bernie Ecclestone is a good thing for F1. Yeah, that's something to mull over until the next video. Hopefully, you know, I'll do another part for this, like I mentioned, talking about that kind of commercial stuff and the calendar of F1 as well. And any of your guys' ideas as well, I'll probably mention in the next video, so feel free to leave your comments. And how do you think we should solve this problem that is Formula 1 at the moment? You know, I just really hope that this dominance of Mercedes is going to stop, but I think the only way that is going to happen is if we change the engine regulations, because we don't want Ferrari just dominating then. We don't want any team to dominate. We don't want any engine manufacturer to dominate, because at least if you have everyone with practically the same engines, which we've had so many times before, then you still have the potential for, you know, I guess in season development as well, I guess it could open up the engine regulations. But I think the engines have to be a lot closer when we bring in new engines. You know, they've got to be kind of restricted on how one engine can improve over the other. There's got to be a budget cap for developing that engine. Mercedes has spent the most money on their engine, and it's the best. It shouldn't be like that. It should be who can spend their money the wisest. Same with the aerodynamics as well. Who can create those revolutionary ideas? We've seen it so many times in the past, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. This is how the aerodynamicists, you know, move up the grid, and it's getting difficult for them just because they've got nothing really to work with, and I think that's a major problem. Also, a major problem, as I mentioned, you know, the car's been too easy to drive. But anyway, I've rambled on for long enough. As I mentioned, leave your thoughts down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Then we'll be talking about the commercial side of Formula 1.